Welcome in, I'm Artress, and over the weekend I played in the Versus Games Treasure Cup, and I ended up bringing Shanks, which I have a lot of fun playing this leader, despite the fact that a lot of people feel like it's a bait deck, quote unquote. So for me, I wanted to bring a deck that I wanted to have fun with, and that deck for me was Shanks. Now I finished 8-2 overall, which I feel like is a pretty solid record, and that put me in 28th place out of over 1,000 players, which, you know, it's not too shabby. Top 32, we'll take it. Starting today, I actually was going to talk about OP10. However, I did get quite a few questions about Shanks overall and the deck list and kind of like different matchups. And considering that there's another month left of OP9, I figured it might be good to go over the different matchups that I played, how I approached different things. Considering that Shanks is also going to be very strong in OP10, and it's not that much different as far as like deck list composition overall. So this video is mostly to help people for the next month or so, but also kind of get some general strategy and tips to playing Shanks in a larger tournament. Before we go any further, if you're new to the channel, please make sure to drop a sub, and also if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. It helps the channel so much. Thank you so much for the support, everybody. Additionally, please make sure to join the Discord if you'd like to talk about the One Piece card game outside of the YouTube comments. We have a pretty fun community over that way and would love to have you. So the reason why I brought Shanks to a larger tournament overall is just because I wanted to enjoy myself and not necessarily have to think about too many lines of play. I think the way that Shanks is played is very much linear, almost in a way very similar to Whitebeard from OP04, where you have certain curves that you're supposed to be hitting and then playing those lines based off of the things that you draw. Of course, with Whitebeard, you're drawing 2 cards a turn, so you're going to be seeing your curve more often, whereas with Shanks, you're more so at the mercy of your draw, and you're only drawing 1 card a turn. However, with your leader ability being able to minus 1,000 power on an opponent's attack once per turn, you are able to be a little bit more tanky and stay alive, and as a result, you build the deck a little bit more defensively with a really strong curve overall. So for me, starting off, I am building this deck with 14 2Ks. We'll go over all of them right now. We have, for me, I'm running 3 Otama. Now, I see a lot of list run 4. For me, 3 was fine because you're not really using this too often to combo. The effect of Otama being able to minus 2,000 power is very powerful, of course, but for the most part, this is a really strong 2K counter, and it's been one of the strongest utility 2Ks in the game since it has come out. And then, of course, running 3 Sanji. Sanji, for me, was a card that I was very skeptical of putting into the deck to begin with. It's a 2K counter that activate main. You may add 1 card from your life area to your hand, and then this character gains 2,000 power during this turn. Then this character gains an additional 2 at Rested Dawn that attaches to it. So basically, you're swinging with 7 for this character when you use the full effect. I actually didn't play this card as a character the entire tournament. The main matchups you're going to want to use this for are Blackbeard and Nami, and I actually didn't come across any of those decks. But otherwise, this will be just a 2K counter. A slightly less utility-based 2K, but as you can see, we kind of have a theme here based off of the 2Ks being useful in hand and also on the field as well. Then I'm running 4 Lime Juice, a new 2K counter from OP09 that just says your opponent can't activate blockers with 4,000 power or less, or just not blockers, but just 1 blocker based off of this. So you play this down, you target 1 blocker on the field. If it's 4,000 power or less, it cannot use its blocker ability. I think I used this one time during the tournament where an opponent had played down a Rebecca, and so I had a Lime Juice ready to go to just bypass that blocker to go for game. And then to round out our 2Ks, I'm running 4 Hongo. I actually think this is the best 2K in the deck. It is a Red Hair Pirates 2K that you can rest this character, and if your leader has the Red Hair Pirates type, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power during this turn. I actually use this on the field quite often, and in fact, in one of my Doflamingo matches, I actually played down 2 Hongos because I didn't have a thing to play down on 5. So on 3 I played down Hongo, and then on 5 I played down Hongo, and then just tapped them both, and then minused a boa by 4,000, swung into the boa, and then they had no field. And so the next turn it was really awkward for them because they either needed to swing into one of the Hongos or just ignore them, and they ended up swinging into one of the Hongos and bouncing the other one back with their loss. So I ended up just getting my 2K back, and then they ate up an attack for that turn, which is very useful. Otherwise, you know, Hongo is going to be a great 2K, but I like playing this down on the field more than anything because it is a, I guess, your equivalent of like the 3-cost Tashigi in black, being able to reuse your ability just by tapping it. whereas like the Otama is more like a Suru in black, for to make comparisons. The overall composition running 4 Hongo, 4 Lime Juice, 3 Sanji, and 3 Otama. I don't think I would change that. I know more people increase their 2K counter count, running anywhere from like 15 to 16. And when I'm playing this deck, I found that running 15 to 16 2Ks was a little bit too much because I would have more often than not 2Ks in hand than anything playable. And so I wanted to cut back on that overall. I don't think I would change the 2K counters, and I'm happy with, you know, the amount that we have here. What I ended up trading some 2K counters for was a little bit more consistency with the deck. And so I added in 2 Uta, which is just a 1-cost searcher that searches the top 5 for a Red Hair Pirates type card. In the deck, I believe we have 22 targets overall, or somewhere around that amount. And the big problem, like I said, with Shanks is that you're kind of at the mercy of what you draw per turn. And sometimes you just don't see your curve. And if you don't see your curve, you can lose because of that. And that just feels really bad and out of your hands. And so in order to mitigate some of that, I wanted to add a couple of consistency pieces to the deck, but I didn't want to overdo it either because Uta has very certain times you can play her. Because you are a deck that relies on curve, if you go first, you're wanting to hit something on 5, you're wanting to hit something on 7, and the only time you can play Uta past 7 is on your 8 Dawn turn, because you don't have anything for 9 in this deck. Or you play her at the beginning of the game on 1 or 3. Obviously, that's the best time to play her, but you don't really need to see her at different stages of the game. And so running her at 4, you might see her at weird or awkward times. Running her at 2, great to have her as a utility to be able to throw her out and be like, hey, I don't have anything on 7. Let me see if I can find something to play on 7, like a Ben Beckman. Or I don't have anything on 5. Let me see if I can find Yasop. Or even then, I don't have any top end. Let me see if I can find my 10-cost Rush Shanks. So that's what I was using Uta for, and I feel like 2 is really good here. For some blockers, I'm running 3 Lucky Roo. Lucky Roo is on KO if your leader has the Red Hair Pirates type. KO up 20 your characters with 6,000 power or less, and it's a base power of 6,000 or less, which is very important if you're going against Black Yellow Luffy. If they use their Fist Luffy, which pumps it up to 8,000, it only counts the base power, so the power boost that they get doesn't matter. You can still KO it based off of that. This card is pretty useless against Doflamingo because they can just bounce it with Trafalgar Law. And I actually, in my Dofi matches, did not play this even if I had it in hand, just because I didn't want it to get bounced back to hand necessarily, although that means that you're dictating their turn for that turn. So there is some argument to playing it down. The main reason this is in the deck is for the BY matchup and also for the Ploofy matchup. Being able to play this down if you're going second against Ploofy, you can KO any target that they have. If they don't have anything that's worth KOing, for instance, you can actually just use this as an attacker, and they're not going to really swing into this because they don't want the ability to go off. Or maybe they swing into it first and then they play their stuff down. Either way, you're soaking up an attack with the Lucky Roo, and I feel like it's pretty useful. And it's searchable because it is a Red Hair Pirate, so if you do come across Uta, you can actually find it. Then for the other 2 blockers that we have Silver's Rayleigh. I really like this blocker. I don't know if I like it as more than 2. I feel like 2 is actually a pretty good ratio here. And I really only played this in the late game. When I get down to it, I'm probably trying to hold on to these and not really wanting to play them down on curve. And the ability here, if you're unfamiliar, is if your opponent has 2 or more characters with 5,000 power or more on the board, draw 2 cards and trash 1 from your hand. This, so many times I would just play down on the last stages of the game where maybe I have a pretty decent hand. I have a board that is probably going to stick, whether it's like a Rayleigh, maybe 10-cost Shanks, and we're getting to those end stages where the opponent has to push through, and you'll play down a Rayleigh, fix your hand, and then from there, they have to get past a Rayleigh, which is a 5-cost, not easy for a lot of decks to do, especially Doflamingo. They can't get past it without either playing Jozu or a, what is a 7-cost Gravity Blade. Whereas like with Lucky Roo, there's so many more options for them to like bounce it or get rid of it. So Silver's Rayleigh was amazing in a lot of my matchups. In fact, in one of my BY matchups, which I'll go over my matchups in a second here, I played down the Silver's Rayleigh at the end of the game. I had no life. They had to get through with, I think, 4 or 5 swings, and the Silver's Rayleigh was able to block the biggest one and won me the game because I could fix my hand from there. Then I talked about the curve and how important the curve is, and so for the 5-drop spot, I'm running 2 Ace. This is mostly for black matchups, and after this tournament, I'm playing 6 black matchups out of 10 rounds. I think I want to increase this, and I'll talk about why I didn't have it at 3, which is I think pretty standard for most Shanks lists. But what's important here is the ability is once per turn, if this character would be removed from the field by your opponent's attack, or an effect rather, you may give this character minus 2,000 power during this turn. So it doesn't matter what kind of an effect, whether it's a KO, a trash, a bottom deck, a bounce back to hand, put into life, you just use the effect and then it sticks on the field. So it's very hard for the opponent to have to remove. They have to remove it twice in order for it to be gone. And obviously that is Black's whole thing. Their whole archetype is getting rid of the field. And if they can't do that, you know, then this thing really sticks and puts in a lot of mileage. Considering, like I said, I played a lot of Black decks over the weekend, which is, I think, in response to Doflamingo being so popular, I would like to increase this. I was running it at 3, but the reason I bumped it down to 2 is because I put in 1 Rush Luffy. I figured, here's the real reason I put in the Rush Luffy. I got a lot of questions as to why. I'm running a deck that has Ace, Newgate, Dragon, Shanks, Rayleigh, all of these influential figures in Luffy's life. And when I build a deck, I know this is going to sound really stupid. I like to have like a theme or a motif or something that's like very flavorful to the deck. And for me, it makes sense to just add Luffy somewhere in the deck. And I was like, well, what's one of the stronger red cards out there? The original starter deck won Luffy that can bypass blockers with Dawn ×2. So there were times actually where I had this in hand ready to go to win the game if an opponent put down a blocker at 0 life. In fact, there was one game where against Smoker where I had it ready to go, and if they had found a blocker, they would have lost because of it. They didn't find a blocker, so they lost anyway. But that being said, Luffy was useful for that. I did play it on curve, I think once during the tournament because I didn't have another 5-drop. And this is really hard for an opponent to remove because swinging into a 6k body is significantly worse than swinging into leader on 6 for an opponent. They have to invest like 2 or 3 Dawn onto their leader to at least try to guarantee to get rid of it, which means they're not playing something on curve. But honestly, at the end of the day, if you're wanting to build the deck in a more serious manner, then I would probably recommend switching this out for another Ace. But of course, it's really cool to have a deck when you have the past King of Pirates in Gold D. Roger and then the future King of Pirates with Monkey D. Luffy. So overall, it's very much a flavor reason to add it into the deck. And if you're not building a deck with at least like some fun, in my opinion, then what's the point? I know that there's a lot of people that take it very, very seriously and build a deck, like net deck it and try to make the most optimal deck. I would say that, you know, you can imagine this being a third Ace, and it's not going to change very much. Of course, you're losing 1k counter by not having the Ace in there, but does it really matter at the end of the day? Probably not. Then we're running the most important 5-drop in the deck, and that is Yasop, a 5-cost that on play add up to 1,000 power to your leader until the end of your turn. So your leader becomes a 6k leader, swing, and on defense for 6k. And then the other thing is once it sticks to the field, Dawn ×1, when attacking, give it to one of your opponent's characters minus 1,000 power during this battle. This is probably one of the most important cards for going against Doflamingo, because the turn that you play this down, if you're going first, your opponent has to answer at the following turn with Jozu, so their momentum is slowed down by a turn in that regard. Otherwise, if this is allowed to stick, you are trading into bodies very easily with the Dawn ×1 ability. And the other thing that's really powerful here is the card that you pair it with. So if you play this on 5, then you play out on 7. Ideally, you're able to play out the 2 Edward Newgates from starter deck 15. This is an on-play, give it to 1 rested Dawn card to your leader or your characters, and then activate main. You may rest this character, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 5,000 power or less. So you can see the synergy here. On 5, you play out the Yasop. Your leader is a 6,000 power body, easier for you to defend against Doflamingo. And then on 7, you play Newgate, attach the 1 to the Yasop. Yasop swings at a rested body, and then there is likely going to be either a Boa or maybe a Weevil standing for 6,000 power. You reduce that by 1,000 and then use the Newgate effect to KO the standing body. So Newgate and Yasop, that combo is extremely powerful, and what I'm usually trying to mulligan for when I'm going against a Doflamingo. The Newgate came up in other situations where an opponent had I think I was playing against an Animal Shanks, and I think I played out a Newgate and was able to just like KO some of their units from there. I don't quite recall if that's the correct way if I played it, but there are other great uses for this. But for the most part, I have this in the deck for the Doflamingo matchup. And then the other 7-drop, and probably arguably the more important 7-drop between these two, is Ben Beckman. Ben Beckman, of course, is a red hair pirate, so searchable off of the Uta, 1,000 counter, and then also on play, trash up to one of your opponent's characters with 6,000 power or less. And ideally, as I said at the start of this, you're trying to find your curve. So you have quite a lot of 5-drops and you have 6, 7-drops. And so you're able to find these very easily, and all you need to do is just find one to be able to play something on curve, and then have these bodies that are pretty hefty stick. And so Ben Beckman ideally is your best because it can trash a character, not KO it. If you're going against something that drops like a 5-cost Sabo, like maybe like a Lucci or maybe like a BY Luffy, you can play this down and just trash characters instead, and it bypasses that. So very powerful, and I think this card being a 7,000 power body is a very good stat line, of course. For my 8 drops, I'm running 3 Dragon and I'm running 4 Rayleigh. I feel like that these cards came up a lot, but Rayleigh came up more so than any other card in the deck. Obviously, it's a 4-of, so you're going to see it more often than not. And this is, sad to say, the most important card for the deck. And the reason why it's sad to say that Rayleigh is the most important card in the deck is because it's so darn expensive right now. I think that the base Rayleigh is roughly like $40 if I checked last. It might actually be more at this point. So unfortunately, if you're looking to play this at a budget level, then this is probably going to stop you from playing this because of the fact that this is a very expensive card, but very crucial to the deck. The fact that on play, it reduces a character's power by -3,000 and another one by -2,000, and then KOs a 3,000 power or less body. Is very strong. And not only does it reduce it for that turn, it reduces it for the opponent's turn as well. So it's harder for those characters to swing. Very strong against Doflamingo, being able to answer their board the turn it comes down. And then if you can play multiple of these, then you're just chilling. So this is your ideal 8 Dawn turn against like Doflamingo and maybe some other matchups. But against like Blackbeard, for instance, or any black decks, this Dragon is very good for you because of the fact it just has Rush, a 9k body with Rush, and then it distributes 2 Rested Dawn to a leader or character, so you can punch even harder with those characters. Is very powerful. I actually didn't see Dragon in a lot of matchups, unfortunately, over the weekend, and I wish that I saw this more. So if I'm going to make a change, I might want to increase this by 1 and play a whole playset of the Dragons, because I did have plenty of times against black decks where I was like, I just wish I had a Dragon right now, and I have a Rayleigh. And Rayleigh's, in my opinion, a little too slow for going against black decks because you're not really trying to control the field as much. You're trying to pressure their hand and their life, and Dragon does a much better job at doing that. But what does an even better job at pressuring hand and life are the 10-cost Shanks, the Rush Shanks from OP09. Give all of your opponent's characters -1,000 power. So just a static effect, really great body to come down, 12,000 power, really strong. Having Rush, of course, is always a good thing. So it has immediate value when it hits the field, and it's always going to be trading into something or taking a life. An opponent will likely never be countering out of this. If they do, that is insane in my opinion, but of course, you know, Gum Gum Giant exists. So with this card, I was running it at 4 in different builds that I was testing out. I was also running the 10-cost KO Shanks. The problem with this being more than 3 is that if you're playing 2 or 3 of them, you're likely winning the game. You only really need 1 to stick. And against most decks, if you play 1 down, it will stick. Of course, if you're going against black or maybe like a Boa where they have tools to just get rid of it, then yes, you might want to have more in the deck overall. It's searchable with the Uta, of course, if you find it. So that's very nice. But we do have one more 10 drop that I feel like is actually very crucial to the deck as well, and that is the Goldie Roger. I actually won a couple of games over the weekend based off of the Goldie Roger ability, being able to, when your opponent uses a blocker, if either of you are at 0 life, you win the game. And it doesn't matter if they block the Roger attack, it's any attack that comes through. If they block with Roger on the field, then you win the game. So if I use my leader swing and they block with it, you win the game if Roger's on the field. I ended up doing that because I ended up winning, actually, I think 2 games based off of Roger just coming down, and they either didn't have enough counter for it or they used a blocker and then they lost. And then for our defensive events, I'm running 2 Bad Manners Kit Course because we are running a fair amount of bricks in the deck, and then I'm running 3 Red Hawks. A lot of lists are running 4, and I actually might agree with 4 here. I wasn't a big Red Hawk fan because I found it very easy for people to play around. But there was also a lot of times where players in the tournament just didn't play around it. Either they knew it was coming and they couldn't play around it, or they maybe forgot and they thought you were bluffing. And there's other times where maybe you get to the end stages of the game and you need a lot of counter in hand, and Red Hawk helps you with that. Just leaving 2 Dawn up is very easy to do when you have 8 costs like Rayleigh and Dragon. You play your 10 drops down on comfortable turns where maybe you're at like 2 or 3 life and you can't be lethal the next turn. And then you play an 8 drop the following turn where maybe you're getting very close to being lethal, so you can leave 2 up for Red Hawk. The effect out of life when it's a trigger is almost like a beige in a sense. It does allow an opponent to attack. So if you use the effect, which is give the opponent's leader or character minus 10,000 power, they can still attack with it. For instance, a Doflamingo, if they're planning on using their ability, even if they are at minus 10,000 power from this effect, they can still attack and get the effect off. So that is something to keep in mind, but you're not going to be taking any damage from it. I actually feel like Red Hawk overperformed over the weekend, so I might want to increase this to 4. Of course, the deck space as of right now feels very comfortable, so I don't know what I would replace it with, but I do really like this card at the end of the tournament. So it did do a lot of work for me in ways that I didn't feel like it would. One specific moment I remember is I went against I think it was a Smoker, or maybe it was a Moria. I can't quite remember which leader it was. It was a black leader that was playing Borsalino. And they had a Kuzan, a Borsalino in their leader swing. It might have been BY Luffy. I can't quite remember. But anyway, doesn't matter which leader it was. The point being, there was a Borsalino on the field. The opponent swung with their Kuzan for 6 because they figured I might have a Red Hawk and they didn't want the Kuzan to be KO'd. And as a result, I minused the Borsalino by 1,000 power and then KO'd it on his turn. So Borsalino's effect on the plus 1,000 power to its body and can't be KO'd is only on my turn. And because it was that person's turn, I was able to use the effect and KO it. And then they didn't have a blocker to defend the Kuzan the next turn or their life. And as a result, we were able to take a lead from that. So I feel like the deck performed very well overall. My matchup spread over the weekend was very odd. As I mentioned, I played against 6 out of 10 rounds against black decks. I was actually expecting quite a lot of Doflamingo because of the fact that we saw, I think, Jonas top recently with Doflamingo, and you know, a lot of people will be playing what is the strongest deck in the format. But of course, I feel like Doflamingo is a very skillful deck. I know a lot of people say that it's very easy to play, but I don't think it is quite as easy as people think it is. There's a lot of lines to play, a lot of things to try to figure out. Aggro decks, you can really lose very quickly if you're not playing them correctly, for sure. And as a result, I think we saw a lot more black decks as a response to blue Doflamingo, because I think like decks like Lucci can handle Doflamingo very well if they see their pieces. And I actually ended up playing 1 Moria, 1 Smoker, 3 Lucci, and then 1 Black Yellow Luffy. So those are the black decks that came across. I played against 2 Mirrors and then 2 Doflamingo. So overall, a very interesting spread. I'm very thankful I didn't come across any red purple Luffy. And purple Luffy can be a little bit of a problem if they obviously see their curve and they go first. But I feel like that matchup is generally like maybe 55-45, depending on if you go first or second against that. So I don't feel like I was too scared of Pluffy coming across my radar, but unfortunately we didn't even get a chance to even test that theory out. Going over the different rounds, let's quickly talk about the matchups and how to differently approach them. So against Moria, I think it's very similar to how you would kind of approach like Doflamingo or maybe even a little bit of a black deck, in the sense that you kind of have to apply pressure to their face, but at the same time you kind of want to control their board as best you can in like the mid stages of the game. And so finding things like Ace, that is a body that sticks, is very important for that matchup. Finding like Ben Beckman, which is going to be harder for Moria to take care of. And also Rayleigh is very important in those matchups. But towards the end of the game, if you can find multiple dragons, you're usually pretty good. Towards the end stages of the game, you go for more of a race scenario where maybe they're at 2 life, you're at 2 or 3 life, and then you have a couple of big bodies and you say, okay, can you outperform me? Can you outswing me? And that kind of forced my opponent at the end of the game to, they were at 0, I was at like 1 or 2, and they had 4 or 5 bodies, a really wide board, because they just were able to spit out a bunch of bodies at once. And I was like, okay, I can't keep answering the board. I'm just going to push life, put them to 0. And if I get them to 0, they're going to have to try to answer me this next turn. And that's exactly what they did. They tried to answer me, and unfortunately for them, I just had so much counter saved up over the game. For the next round, I went against Shanks, which that matchup I ended up losing, and I think that player ended up finishing like 13th in the tournament, so congrats to them. Unfortunately, this is a matchup where I didn't see all the good stuff. My opponent saw the good stuff from what they needed. They saw the 10-cost Shanks, they saw an 8-cost Dragon. For me, I only saw 2 top-end pieces, and that was 2 Rayleighs, and that isn't that strong in this matchup because you want to be able to pressure them as hard as you can, because they're trying to pressure you. It's a little bit of a race, a game of chicken, if you will. And so I just didn't see the cards I needed, and I didn't really feel like I lost that one due to my opponent outplaying me. I think my opponent just drew better, and as a result, they were able to take that win. The Lucci matchups that I ended up winning, so round 3 and round 6, basically what you need to do there is try to go first, and although you're supposed to, in my opinion, go first, I ended up going second in both of those, and I was able to just find a decent curve, apply some pressure with the dragons. I think I found multiple 10 costs as well in those matchups, and so as a result, was able to win. And then the Lucci matchup that I lost in round 9, I went first actually in this one, and they just saw exactly everything they needed. Of course, they went Jack on 8, but they used like Ice Age Jack, or they used like a Tempest Kick Jack to answer something on the board. And then after that turn, they went Moria, Moria, Moria. And I just didn't see that much top end, unfortunately. I saw the Rayleighs in that matchup, and I really want to see the Dragons in that matchup instead. So unlucky for me, very well played on the opponent's part, and they drew the nuts, as you can call it, but also part of it, they played really well. So that was the Lucci matchup loss, but honestly, this matchup is really tough for Shanks in general because of the fact that they can answer the board pretty easily, and Shanks generally will just play one body a turn and then pass. And then Lucci, of course, is really great at answering 1 to 2 bodies a turn. So Lucci is going to be an unfavored matchup. Luckily for me, I was able to pull out 2 out of the 3 wins over the weekend. The Smoker matchup was very similar to the Lucci matchup, so my round 4 was Smoker, and the fact that they are able to answer bodies very easily, they can answer tall bodies very easily, is kind of a huge issue for me. For me, the reason I think I ended up winning this game is because my opponent, on one of the crucial turns where they needed to see like an Ice Age, I think it was when I dropped my first 10 cost Shanks, they didn't have an Ice Age to answer it. And so one of the 10 cost Shanks stuck on the board, and I actually played 3 that game, which is really insane that I was able to see all 3 naturally. But, you know, that's going to be really hard for the opponent to answer. They did answer 2 out of the 3, but because they weren't able to answer the first one when it came down, it was just causing too much damage every turn, and it overwhelmed them at the end of the game. I played a Dofi in round 5, and so the Dofi player, for them, unfortunately, I saw all 4 Rayleigh. I just really drew the nuts that game, and Rayleigh just puts in a lot of work against that deck. And when Rayleigh starts coming down, chaining them turn after turn, it's really impossible for the Doflamingo player to really establish a board, plus also pressure my face well enough. And because if I'm able to answer their board the first turn with Rayleigh, and then have another Rayleigh come down the next turn, and then I have a bunch of these bodies that keep stacking that can answer their board and eventually just push for life, that is honestly the best way to play it, and I got really lucky seeing those cards. You have to mulligan the best you can. I think every time I play Doflamingo, if I don't see a 5 and a 7, or at least like 1 Rayleigh, I'm going to mulligan that hand every time that I see it. I think the fact that I opened up in that hand, I believe 2 or 3 Rayleigh, and it was like 2k counters after that, I was like, well, let's just hold on and see if we can make it to the late game stages, and if we do, we win. And I did, and we won. So that's generally with Doflamingo kind of how you have to do it. You have to try to stem their aggression as much as possible by countering out everything that you can early game, by not overextending your hand either, because if you start tapping your bodies in the middle stage of the game, sometimes Doflamingo will focus those bodies instead. If you've been countering out the entire game, then you might not have enough counter to keep those bodies alive, and bodies sticking on your side of the field, especially tall bodies, is very important. So you kind of have to have a balance of, oh, how often can I counter? Am I okay taking a life here? Am I okay taking 2 lives here? It's something you have to consider, and generally for me, when I'm playing against Doflamingo, I try to counter out of the first 1 to 2 attacks that they have. And then from there, I'm like, okay, I think I can take a hit here. I think I can counter out of this one, maybe only taking 1 a turn, and kind of calculating what you need to do to stay healthy and also build your board at the same time. So round 6, I played Lucci, so talked about that one. Round 7, I played against the BY. I don't really know if I played this one very correctly. I think a lot of people will argue that you're supposed to attack against BY, because if you attack against the BY and you get them to 0 early, then they have to use their leader ability, and their leader ability will have them start vomiting cards from their hand, so they will start going down in hand size, and the more times that they use their leader ability, obviously they run out of resources very fast, and so you're trying to get them to use their resources as fast as possible. For me, I decided to test the theory of let's not swing and just starve them and build a board and then try to push all at once. And I don't know if that was very smart. They were able to awaken with a lot of cards in hand. I think they had like 11 or 12. And so I was feeling very uncomfortable because at that point in the game, I didn't have a lot of bodies on the field. I think I may have had like 1 body, if even that. Actually, I don't even know if I had 1 body at that point in the field, because I think that they might have put a Kuzan out. They used a Rocket Luffy to KO the big body. And then the following turn, once they awakened, I played out a 10-cost Shanks, and then they Rygoed it. But this was a game where I saw all 3 10-cost Shanks and a Roger, and I was able to grind them out of resources due to that. Because after the first 10-cost Shanks was gone with the Rygo, the next 2 stuck, and then they were doing damage every turn. So that was really the only option that I had, and I think if I may have played it a little bit more aggressively, I would have been in a better spot. So I probably would recommend playing more aggressively against BY as opposed to sitting back and starving them out, because starving them out is not really doing much, to be honest. So that matchup was really interesting. Overall, the tournament I was very happy with. I'll probably finish out the OP09 Treasure Cup run next week with another Shanks list, very similar to this one, if not the same list. If you're looking for a leader that just rewards good fundamentals, Shanks is that leader for you. He's a very strong leader overall. Don't let people online tell you that he's bait. I do think he is a very reasonable leader to take to tournaments, especially if you know how to play the game at a good fundamental level. So you will be rewarded for putting that time in, for understanding the best lines to play. Of course, you know, Shanks does lose to himself sometimes, so keep that in mind. He is one of the most 50-50 fair leaders, as people say, but he will be very strong in OP10, so it's worth considering continuing playing him, of course. So if you have any questions about anything in the deck list or how to play certain matchups that I may not have covered in this video, please let me know in the comments below. I look forward to seeing what you guys say. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.